Welcome back, MTG Joe here. We're here for another installment of the weekly meta breakdown where we look at the top performing decks on the MTG Arena ladder. We're going to start off this week looking at standard best of one, try to cover as many deck formats as possible, best of one, best of three, before the end of the week. Just a general programming note, I'm going to be taking a bit of a content break towards middle to end of this week and for about a week. Some of the metas are a little stale right now. We're getting the new set in April, I believe. So just taking the time towards the end of the seasons to kind of detach for a week or so and then come back with more content. So if you don't hear from me, I am just relaxing and taking a break. But we'll try to get out as many as we can leading up to that. And with standard best of one, we are going to be looking at untapped data. So this is companion tool, aggregates user win rates amongst others. I'll paste all these deck lists. If you want to use Untap, link is in the video description. So all that jazz, and we're good to go. We're going to look at popularity of the decks, and then we'll shift over to the decks themselves just to see like what volume of decks are being played and then what kind of comes from that. So in terms of popularity, it is a very aggressive format right now in best of one from Diamond and Mythic rank. Mono red at 22%, Boros Convoke at 15%. There's really an opportunity to configure a deck that has a reasonable shot, and I feel like the pillars are: can I kill them by turn 3 to 4, or do I have a turn 3 sweeper? That's kind of the angle. What this is pushing is you usually see some of this dichotomy in best of one with like linear aggro, like combo or hard control. Mid-range usually has a harder time dealing with best of one, but further now where it's hard for a mid-range deck to play like duress against a creature heavy pile or like certain discard spells when they need to play to the board or vice versa. So usually this is one of the pillars. So you want to be mindful when you're building your deck. Can you have reasonable game against both hyper aggressive decks and hard control? So looking at the trends, we see kind of mono red just increasingly kind of creep up. Similar, the Boros deck peaked about mid-March and is slowly declining. See a slight increase of Azorius control and then just a big lump of like Amalia, Mono Black Aggro, Jeskai Control, Selesnya Enchantments, Orzhov Super Friends, stuff of that nature. What deck is this? Selesnya Enchantments had a real bad start of the month. It's just like, hanging around mid-50s, mid-50s. So we'll take a look at the decks. I'll paste all these deck lists like I mentioned. So we are going to start off Diamond and Mythic rank, 100,000 games played between March 11th and the 18th. And kind of a throwback here, Mono White Humans is the highest win rate deck at 66.9%. So generally speaking, this can go slightly bigger than the Mono Red deck, has incidental life gain. Mono Red now has Witchstalker Frenzy, so something like Adeline isn't just a complete brick wall, but you also have like the Luminarch Veteran to gain you life. So this is a way to kind of hedge against these aggressive decks where you can play something like Adeline, make tokens, gain life, Recruitment Officer for card advantage, Skrell for protection, some Wardens in here along with the Evangelist. So some elements of the Convoke deck. Thalia's reasonable against the control decks, just kind of slowing them down a turn or two to hopefully let you hit in. You're not completely dead to temporary lockdown since some of your threats are 3 and technically at times 0 mana, but also 5 mana. Lord effects with Intrepid Adversary and Copper Coat Vanguard, and then removal with Ossification and Brutal Cathar. A couple Caverns for unblockable or for uncounterable, and then Mishra's Foundry as a utility creature land. We then go to Boros Convoke, 62.7. So I actually featured, it was interesting, I did highest win rate deck card in standard right now, and it was actually Sanguine Evangelist, even in best of 3. Being featured in the deck, I guess just the times it hits, I would think it'd be Imidane's Recruiter, but the stats were saying it's Sanguine, which is kind of interesting. We're seeing fewer copies of the War Leader call in lieu of Sanguine, just because they can be hit off the Knight Errant. Case very, very strong in this deck, but kind of the core, you're playing these 1-drops that make artifacts or is an artifact itself, gleeful demoing them, and then just making a bunch of tokens, going wide, and just kind of overrunning your opponent. This deck was popping up a lot even in Historic, where we have a kind of akin, like another Gleeful Demolition, akin card, just same kind of effect. that's in there, and then you have the Loxodon that also convokes there, so another powerful effect. The biggest downside with this deck is the mana base is pretty terrible. Anytime you see Thran Portal being registered in a deck, you know the mana base is really hurting. No fast land in Boros, but very explosive deck. You win quick, you lose quick. You really want to dodge temporary lockdowns. Then go to Bant Toxic at 62%. So this is mostly a blue-white deck. The only green card is Venerated Rot Priest. You'll have only a few lands that can cast it, but Seedcore, Myrex can do double duty. This version here has got a lot of kind of tempo elements, so it's not necessarily an aggressive deck, but you are just trying to deal 10 points of damage. The damage being poison-based. So Crawling Chorus is 2 bodies in 1, Skrull for protection. You have Jawbone Duelist that's really strong with putting counters on. Charge the Mites can be used as removal, or just make more bodies. Annex Sentry is removal. Skrull's Hide keeps pumping out bodies and can gain lifelink, which is strong. Serum Snare as a kind of tempo element that proliferates, which is strong. Experimental Augury proliferates. Counter spells, protection, bounce. So just a lot of tempo elements in the deck. A lot of strong utility lands as well. This deck's reasonable against like control in part because you don't really care about their life total. And Myrex is just really, really strong. So they need to deal with your creatures while also then just dying to like a Myrex or a Skrull's Hive, something like that. Mono Red Aggro. So this one's an interesting build. So you typically don't see Chandra Dress to Kill in the main board, nor do you see it in Best of One that often. I'm a staunch proponent of Chandra as not a good Best of One card. It doesn't protect itself, and it's isn't impactful enough. Like you want in the control matchups, but we saw at least like a third of the decks were aggressive decks. It's very easy to attack down. I think if you want something that's a grindier element, you're better off with Forge. I also prefer the versions that are on Witchstalker Frenzy, and I also don't think 4 Godric's where you want to be in the format right now. My thoughts. But I also like the red case. I think it's good for grind advantage. This version here is on 22 lands, which is reasonable, but I'd probably trim a 3-drop for like a Scoundrel perhaps. A very lean, aggressive deck. Just kind of pushing through. Basically, like a lot of the variants with these decks are going to be how they configure their 3-drop slot, and then how they configure some of their 2-drop options, whether they're on the full Feldons, if they're on Scoundrels, stuff of that nature. You can kind of like change the dials a bit. Godric's strong, but it's not the best into control. It's also just, it's 3 mana that can die to like 1 to 2 mana spells, which also kind of feels bad at times. So you just want to be mindful of that when you're playing. I've also started trying out Myrex instead of Mishra's Foundry. Just found it a little bit better against the grindier matchups. Mono Blue Tempo, 59%. So this is a very budget-friendly deck, but I would say a little bit tricky to play. The Mono Blue Ninjas deck that we featured last week is probably a little easier and honestly probably a little bit more interesting. This deck's kind of built around saying no to your opponent multiple ways. Make disappears, negates, just some counters in here. This spell costs 2 less if it targets a creature. So counterspell out of air, kind of in that spot. Just a bunch of different counters, bounce, protection effects. So you get a Haughty Djinn, you protect it. Or you get a Tolarian Terror for like 1 mana, very cheap. The 6 mana card draw effect, which is interesting in this deck. If you have it, then play Otawara, another card you can consider. Sometimes you'll see things like Letter Shredder. March of Swirling Mist is another card you might want to consider for this deck. Moving on, we go to Orzhov Super Friends. So this is like an Orzhov control deck, and we're seeing the pillar with temporary lockdown being included. So this is much more of a reactive deck. I generally don't like Liliana in control decks, just because you typically, like it'll hurt you likely more than it'll hurt these aggressive decks where they usually dump their hands. I think playing just more early removal, these marches are fine, but they don't scale too well in the early game. They're better kind of later game. You could play just like various other threats. You can play like Depopulate as an option. like Graveyard Trespasser, stuff like that to gain you some life, Sheoldred. But this is just a bunch of removal, sweepers, deadly cover up, the end. Phyrexian Arena is a little ambitious in an aggressive deck. Similarly with Sorin's Plus, you have a lot of very expensive cards that will hurt you. Like Soul Search is kind of discard, Outrageous Robbery is a win condition. So it's just like Planeswalkers in a removal shell. Just kill everything, drop a Planeswalker, try to win that way. Restless Fortress and Myrex as some win conditions in the mana base. I think personally, if you're going to be doing like control, you're better off going blue-white. It just gives you permission in these kind of mid-rangey style matchups, and you get better card advantage, you get better permission on the stack. You're better off taking advantage of the Wandering Emperor. Because in a deck like this, it's pretty transparent when you do have like the Wander, where against like blue-white control, they can have a lot of different things. You're tapping out a bit more in this particular build. Plus Sunfall's really, really good. Gruul Aggros. This is in best of 1, it's basically mono red splash Questing Druid. In best of 3, you get like Pick Your Poison, Spacejus. I played this in the standard metagame challenge. This deck's really, really fun. So this one's more of like a sly red, prowessy red. So you have Swiftspears, you have Cacophony Scamps, Fugitive Codebreakers, full kind of 1 mana, give trample and stuff to it. Monstrous Rage as well as Ancestral Anger. You can build up a Cacophony Scamp to be a lot of power and then kind of throw it at your opponent once it deals damage. Some burn in there, Case to refill your hand, Frenzy as removal as well. Questing Druid, just kind of fuel. So this one's really fun. It's a little soft because you are trying to throw spells onto creatures, but it's like when you pop off, you just deal like huge amounts of damage in a single shot. Then move to Azorius Control. So this one here, full lockdowns, Union of the Third Path can buy you a lot of time, even like on turn 3, getting you like 3, 4, 5 life, depending on how many cards you've played out to that point. Just a lot of kind of good removal between Get Lost, March of the Worldly, Deduce for card advantage, No More Lysis counters, Deluge for card advantage, Emperor, and then just sweepers in there. You're winning with like Anchorage or Sunfall tokens, Wandering Emperor, Anchorage kind of mixed into there. You have Myrex, Sunken Citadel reduces the cost of all these activated land abilities as well, so you get some utility in that respect. And then lastly, Simic Cookies. So Simic Artifacts. A lot of artifact synergy here. So Case of the Filkaged Falcon. Mix an artifact, and then once you solve the case, you can basically animate said artifact. Hard-hitting questions is removal. Just a bunch of like either creatures that are artifacts. So you get like Unblockable. Spyglass Siren makes a map token. Wormlight gets bigger. Cauldron can take advantage of a lot of activated abilities. So like the Unblockable from Brute or Surge Engine, the animation from Tough Cookie, map tokens from Sentinel. Our Larcenist can be removal, but also create artifacts. Zoetic Glyph animates, and then when it dies, you get to discover 3, which can potentially even just find more copies of Zoetic Glyph. Schooner for some map tokens, or like exploring. So a lot of kind of synergy there. It is a little, at times, can be soft to aggressive decks since you don't have true removal, but you can kind of just get bigger creatures out and kind of run them over that way there. There's no fast line in these colors, so it's a little problematic at times because you are playing quite a few tap lines, and then just the timing of like your Dreamer Cascades or stuff like that. That's it for the week. Nothing like super innovative, to be honest. I was trying to find, every week I try to find like 1 or 2 like cool decks, but I feel like at this point the meta's kind of settled and people are playing what they're playing. In part why I was gonna take the break at this point. But let me know what you think, if you've been playing anything spicy, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks for watching.